Welcome to the new Workology Go Podcast. In just under 5 minutes, we'll get you the HR and workplace news you need before you start your day 3 times a week. Get ready, get set, and go with the new Workology Go Podcast.
Here are today's HR and workplace news headlines from the Workology Go Podcast. I'm Jessica Miller-Merrill. This podcast is sponsored by HSA Bank.
As HR leaders, it is our responsibility to make our workplaces inclusive, diverse, and as safe as possible for every single employee. This means creating a workplace culture and experience that allows all employees to feel respected and comfortable in their environments. I believe that this includes all members of the LGBTQ communities. Recently, I came across a story from MasterCard where customers who are transgendered will now be allowed to have their credit card with their chosen name. Personally, I think this is fantastic, but I wondered about employees and what this means for workplaces. Not sure where I'm going with this? You will in a few. How many employees are transgendered? Well, this is not a question that has been researched or polled very heavily for a lot of reasons. And I think that people haven't really been that forthcoming because of the amount of stigma that people feel. And maybe they also feel unsafe when openly sharing if they are transgendered. The Washington Post published results from a report of high school students earlier this year, with 2% of them identifying as transgender. I think it's safe to assume that these numbers likely mirror or are similar to our workforce populations. If MasterCard is allowing transgendered customers to add their chosen names, is this something we are doing in our workplaces? And what about employee benefits? Today's featured article for the Workology Go podcast comes from Ad Age, and it is titled, MasterCard Will Allow Transgendered Customers to Use Their Chosen Names on Credit Cards and Debit Cards. SHRM published a resource article earlier this year titled, Gender Identity. How should an employer handle a transgender employee's request for a name change? I'll link to the article in the resource section of this podcast transcript. This is available to members only, but I'll read you the author's recommendation on how they feel, SHRM feels that we should handle this name change request when it comes to transgender employees. Now, I will say that the author isn't listed on this article, but it is part of their toolkit section on the website. So I will quote the anonymous writer resource from SHRM. Employers should handle a name change request from a transgender employee the same way they handle an employee's name change request. Anyone can legally change his or her name, assuming it's not for fraudulent reasons. Choose to go by a nickname or to use an English name if his or her name is difficult to pronounce. However, there are compliance and practical considerations that dictate how employers should handle such situations. I'm still quoting from the article from SHRM. Here we go. Continued. The Internal Revenue Service requires the name on an employee's W-2 form to match the name on his or her Social Security card. These records can be changed when the employee has completed a legal name change. Until then, a note referencing the more commonly used name can be placed with payroll records for internal purposes. Now, this is kind of a change from, I think, the direction that MasterCard is going. While we as employers might not be able to change an employee's legal name on their benefits documentation and employee paperwork, we can make a policy and practice for allowing for employees to change their names for use on things like company email, employee directories, and recognition walls and intranet pages, hence the nickname. MasterCard is leading the way and setting the example here. And I believe very strongly, because I've chosen this article to spotlight for this episode, that this is something we as organizational and cultural inclusion champions should follow suit. These might be small changes. This only maybe impacts, according to our Washington Post poll, 2% of the workforce. But to the individual These are big gestures to helping all our employees feel welcomed in our workplaces. And this is important because you need to know, and I want you to consider that nearly 30% of adolescents who identify as transgender, this also comes from that poll, have attempted suicide. This small gesture is not just about inclusion and respect for our workplaces, but it is also about supporting an employee's mental health and wellness too. And that is the reason, many of reasons, that I wanted to spotlight this particular article for this Workology Go podcast.
With health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, health reimbursement arrangements, COBRA, and commuter benefits, HSA Bank is simplifying the health account experience for over 35,000 employers and 2.7 million members alike, inspiring everyone to own their health. Learn more at hsabank.com.
And that's this episode of the Workology Go podcast, sponsored by HSA Bank. We're your go-to for HR and workplace news. I'm Jessica Miller Merrill. Thank you for listening.
To learn more about the Workology Go podcast, subscribe to us on Apple, Google, and Stitcher. Our podcast is also available on Alexa and Google Home. Learn more at workology.com/Go podcast and access this episode's resources, links, and reports for more information.